from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, May 24th, 2019, and this is Memorial Weekend. And we're going to pay tribute to the fallen soldiers of this great nation. And we talk about God's fallen soldiers also. We're going to use Memorial Day. We're going to have 4 videos to bring to you today. It's going to talk about Memorial Day, its founding, and where it comes from. Then we're going to talk about U.S. and China. There's big talk about what's going on with the trade tariffs, but we're going to bring you something that the news is not bringing you. And this is how this could possibly lead into the foundation of a Gog and Magog scenario. We're also going to talk about the Feast of Weeks, and today we're going to bring in Jubilee. We're going to see how we get to Jubilee and lay the foundation for what it really means. So you ready? We got a lot to talk about. Let's get right into our program today. We want to begin with a video today because we really want to use this weekend to kind of get away from all the problems that the rest of the world has and talk about what the people of this nation has done for our nation. We're going to begin with a video called Honoring the Fallen. Take a look and I'll be right back.
We honor selflessness as you bravely set aside your own wants and needs to defend those who could not defend themselves. Your acts of sacrifice have held hope, opportunity, and freedom for generations to come. You have built a bright future for our children and our children's children. We honor you.
We honor courage as you proudly fought for our country and all that it stands for. In the face of fear, you stood tall, holding true to the convictions of this great nation, never backing down or admitting defeat. You were an example of strength as you marched forward with certainty, heads high, hearts full, and ready to face any obstacle ahead. We honor you.
We honor leadership as you demonstrated excellence for all of us to follow. The strength and passion inspires a nation to achieve, not only in service, but in our daily lives. Resiliency, determination, and fortitude are just a few of the qualities you've shown us. We honor you.
We honor camaraderie, as you never left a fallen brother or sister behind. Others' lives were as important to you as your own. At risk to yourself, and without a second thought, you ran dauntlessly into the field of battle to pull your brother or sister from the trenches, carrying them to safety. We honor you.
We honor humility, as through your strength, you still show gentleness, never boasting or prideful, but humble in service and character, showing us that true heroes are not self-proclaimed, but silently seen. We honor you.
We honor greatness,
As today we remember
Many men and women
who gave their lives in service to this nation.
They are our fathers,
mothers,
Husbands,
neighbors,
sons,
cousins,
daughters,
brothers,
friends.
and heroes. We honor you.
When you see a video like that, it's quite humbling to see all those who have fought and died for this great nation, particularly in light of the condition we live in today when so many people around this nation want to do nothing but just destroy and tear down the very foundation upon this nation, upon what God has blessed us with. Well, our prayers go out to all those who have fallen, for their families, and for the remembrance, and for those who are out there today still fighting to protect this great nation. Well, if you watched our program last year, you probably know the answer to this. What was the original name for Memorial Day? Well, I don't want to give it to you just yet. We want to play a video, and this video is by the History Channel. This is the history of Memorial Day, and in it, it's got the name. We'll tell you what it is when we come back, and I'll see you in just a couple moments.
It's the 3-day weekend that officially kicks off the summer season. A time for hanging at the beach, barbecuing, even catching a few laps of the Indy 500. But Memorial Day is also the most solemn American holiday, a day to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice while defending their nation. The Civil War, America's bloodiest chapter. Over 600,000 soldiers killed in action. Almost every community in every state suffered the loss of young men. As the war came to an end, mourners in both northern and southern states began placing flags and flowers on the graves of fallen soldiers. The town of Waterloo, New York is officially credited with starting the holiday. On May 5, 1866, its citizens closed their shops and businesses so that everyone could decorate the graves of the men killed during the war. Then an old war general had an idea. John A. Logan was the leader of a Union Veteran Association. He spearheaded an effort to unite all the decoration services into one national holiday, designating May 30th as Decoration Day. On the first National Decoration Day, 1868, 5,000 war widows, orphans, and other mourners gathered at Arlington National Cemetery. They placed flowers and ribbons on the 20,000 graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers. Two future presidents and fellow Union veterans, Ulysses Grant and James A. Garfield, attended the ceremony. Throughout the 19th century, Decoration Day grew. Ceremonies were held in major Civil War battlefields like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and Antietam Field in Maryland. By the end of the century, the holiday was renamed Memorial Day. But war wounds ran deep. Most southern states refused to commemorate a holiday they regarded as honoring Union soldiers. So each state commemorated their war dead with different Confederate decoration days. Several southern states continue the tradition to this day. World War I ushered in the age of modern warfare. America lost over 130,000 soldiers in the global conflict. This shared experience finally bonded America's North and South. When the war ended, May 30th became a day to honor all American soldiers who died in battle as far back as the Revolutionary War. America interred its first unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery on Armistice Day, 1921. Every Memorial Day, this soldier and other unknown soldiers are honored with a wreath-laying ceremony conducted by the President or Vice President. They are reminders of all those who never made it home. Memorial Day became a federal holiday in 1971, and Congress shifted it from May 30th to the fourth Monday in May, giving federal workers a 3-day weekend. All across America, veterans and civilians still gather in parades and vigils to remember the generations who gave their lives for their nation's freedom.
Well, did you catch it? Did you catch the name? What was the original name for Memorial Day? It was originally called Decoration Day, as they went out and decorated the graves so that people could go out and decorate the graves to the honored fallen. I'll bring up something here from Vietnam that is still on the minds of many, many people and soldiers, how they were so mistreated following the Vietnam War as they came home. Literally, people met them at the airports and spit on them, and it was a war that was just very unpopular. But 58,000 people were actually killed in that war. 340,000 actual casualties, 75,000 became disabled. This is the Vietnam Memorial. This is in Washington, D.C., of course, and you can see that. I had a chance to see this many, many years ago on what was called the Traveling Wall. The Traveling Wall began in 1984. The Traveling Wall was about 3/5 the size of the original monument or the memorial in Washington that was created to travel to the U.S. to help the nation. And at that time, there was a lot of news because this was still fresh in a lot of people's lives with all the families that were affected because of this Vietnam War. And the news was talking about it, and I was watching the news, how the people would walk up to this wall and the emotion, how people literally would touch the wall and they would basically collapse. And so it came to New Orleans, and it was either Tulane University or Loyola University where they set it up. And one Sabbath afternoon, I decided I wanted to go out there and see what this was all about, because it's hard to imagine when you see a wall like this. And this artist, if we can put that back up on the main screen, take a look at this picture if you've never seen this. If you can see the soldiers slightly embedded into the wall itself, where you actually see someone here, whether he's a dad or a parent or who it is, but he's actually like touching the wall. What people were doing to find closure is the wall would travel. They would go find this wall. In each one of these panels, what they would have is a specific month and a specific week and a specific day of the month. And they would go along these panels and they would know the date that their loved one died. And so they would go along this panel and they would find the name. And when they find the name, they would put their hand on the name. And it was like this artist's rendition here. They would touch their loved one. It was like a way of saying goodbye. And I watched the people, and I just actually sat on a bench. And I don't know how long I sat there, but it was a long time, because there was a lot of people that were coming out and they were going through this. And they would bring flowers and they would bring whatever they want to leave. And they would leave things, this loved one's belongings. They would just actually leave it there. And you would see the people literally walk up to that wall, touch it, and just fall on their knees and cry. And the emotion, and people sometimes have to help them up because many were elderly people when they would go through this. And so that went around this nation, and it was a type of healing for many, many people that was going on. I bring this up almost every year around Memorial Day because it reminds me of something about God. Because you see, God's got his own Memorial Day. Look what God says, touching God. I want to bring something out that I hadn't brought out before, but it's very important to try to understand this. In Hebrews 4:14 and 15, this is my little nuggets upon the story. It says, seeing then that we have so great a high priest that has passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest that cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Throughout 6,000 years, many of God's saints, as if they were on this wall, have been touched by God. And God says that those beloved fallens is in his hands and is his care, waiting for the time that Jesus Christ is going to come back to this earth and resurrect all of those fallen. It's an amazing story that God's given to us. I got one more I want to bring out about this. Look in Revelation 6. And this is one of the reasons I'm bringing this out now, because of the time frame in which we live today as we near the return of Jesus Christ. That type of Vietnam War, the war that's going to go on, this heavenly war now, is becoming on this planet that God says we fight against the principalities, not against flesh and blood, is that this war that's going to be waging now. Look what it says in Revelation 6, verses 9 through 11. And when it opened the fifth seal, I saw under the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, under the altar, the souls. In other words, what God's saying, just like those people who were looking to find closure, the loved ones, to be with them again, these souls of those individuals are under the altar of God. That's how dear they are to God. Think about his Memorial Day for his saints. Because see, there's going to be a resurrection. And all of those people are going to be resurrected again. And just like you see this person touching those soldiers, when Jesus Christ comes back, that touch will transfer from physical to spiritual, and they'll all be resurrected. All of those saints. We need to remember that, because look what else it says. And all those souls says, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on those that dwell on the earth? Verse 11. And white robes were given to every one of them, and it said to them that they should rest for a little season until their fellow servants, also their brethren that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled. So what God's given us the insight that there's coming another martyrdom before the return of Jesus Christ. And if I can leave you anything today is the hope, is that those people who will be martyred, and it's not going to be everybody. God will protect most of his people, but there will be a martyrdom, is that those souls are so precious to him that he has not forgotten them, In fact, they're under the very altar of God, where he sits in his heavenly throne. The altars of those who died for the elect are sitting under the throne of God. Think about that. Satan can't get to them, and they're going to be resurrected when he comes back. What an incredible story. That is a story of hope. It's a powerful story because you see, he uses those fallen to resurrect hope for all of those who live at that time, just like he's done throughout history. Now, let's take a look at that memorial now of God's elect in Hebrews 11. Look what God says. It's the faith chapter. Now, I don't want to cover the whole chapter because there's just so much there. But I'm going to pick up the story here. It says, they were stoned. They were sawn asunder. They were tempted. They were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented. In other words, God let them go through that because they were looking beyond this physical, just like you and I. Is that we go through a lot in our lives every day. But it's nothing compared to what God says, the glory he's going to give to his elect when he comes back to this earth. Look at verse 38. And this is how God really feels about this whole thing. Of whom the world was not worthy. In other words, God, think about this. This is how God, if he was putting his hand on the wall, like for his altar, for those souls, he says the world wasn't worthy for what you died for. And he's coming back. He's going to resurrect all of those people. What an incredible story. That's going to be a day when Memorial Day becomes the day of life, the return of Jesus Christ for God's elect. But I wanted to bring that out to you because every year I bring up that wall. I never forgot that wall. It touched me deeply when I seen what people were going through and the amount of loss of life. You had to be there to see it. And if you ever go to Washington, take the time to go take a look at that wall and to see what all that is about. All right, let's get into a little short story here. And then we're going to get into our main focus today, to China. This is an amazing, this one was actually sent to us by one of our team with Clayton here, about the infiltration now of our youth. This is incredible. This is cartoon entertainment infiltrating the minds of the youth. Now, this is a new area of assault. As you know, we've been covering many areas that our children are being assaulted by the left, by the ungodly, you name it, how those are just completely removing God. Now this is coming into cartoons and PBS, right? PBS. All right, PBS cartoon Arthur. Now this is a big cartoon for the youth. Arthur becomes the first PBS cartoon with a gay wedding. It's a brand new world, as this article writes. This is out of Christian Headlines from 5/15/2019. Parents who thought that the PBS kid cartoons were neutral space in the debate over LGBT issues may want to reconsider. The popular PBS kids series Arthur broke new ground on Monday by inserting the same-sex wedding into the plot, as Arthur and his friends learned that their male teacher, Mr. Rayburn, is marrying a man. I don't know. When will it ever stop? Cartoon movies targeting the youth. So when I saw that, I went and said, let's go take a look and see what else is going on with this here. Oh, by the way, I will bring you one more thing. I heard in the story this morning from Audrey, another one of the team here, my wife, is that Alabama, some of the stations of PBS in Alabama will not play that cartoon. Well, good for you. Good for you that you're not playing that. Excuse me. Netflix launches a drag queen superhero for cartoons. For kids? Really? Avengers Endgame, including Marvel's first gay character. I mean, it's not going to stop. Shazam, did a gay superhero, did we notice a gay superhero in Shazam? And Marvel makes history with its first drag queen superhero. First drag queen superhero. Now, I saw that on my computer as I was looking at this first drag queen superhero, how natural it's become. I got an advertisement. This is for, let me get this correct here. This is for a Diva brunch. I'm not making this up. This was a 50% off coupon from Groupon. You probably heard about Groupon. Well, drag queen brunch now from June 9th to September 1st, all the summer months while the kids are out of school. They bring the family. It's for all ages. A drag queen brunch. Now think about, excuse me, when these brunches are. They're usually Sundays. So I went and looked at the schedule, and sure enough, these are on Sundays. So here's the plot as it thickens. You get up, you get the family dressed, you go to church. What do people do after they leave church? They go to brunch. Go to brunch with the drag queen as you leave church. Think about that. How perverted can the world become? Okay, let's get to our main focus now for the program today. This is the main focus, and this is very, very important. And this is going to talk about things that you're not hearing in the news, because this is leading to elements that appear to be working toward biblical fulfillment of a World War III scenario, Gog and Magog. All right, so you with me? All right, let's take a look at this now. This is talking about the China retaliation. Now, last week, we talked about how President Trump was bringing in increased tariffs because China backed away from the negotiation table. All right, so you're going to increase our tariffs. Now we're talking about retaliation. China threatens retaliation as U.S. prepares to hike the tariffs as it happened. All right, now here's what we're looking at now. So their retaliation goes beyond just tariffs. They're building a wall, so to speak, and trade that the United States maybe hasn't thought it through well enough yet for what's going on. But look what they're doing while all of this is going on. First of all, they're working with their allies in the region, all right, in the region. So this is really important that you need to take a few moments here to try to absorb what it is I'm trying to bring out here. All right, Beijing, this is China's Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative, meshes perfectly with the goals of Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union with Russia, President Vladimir Putin said. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about now going all the way into Europe, all the way through Asia, through Russia, and working with all of the Eastern countries. They're building these walls, these roads and these structures. Here you have land, here you have water. These parallel many of the trade routes from many, many years ago. So we're looking at the former and the latter coming into fulfillment here. Now, it's working with President Vladimir Putin for making this work. So Russia's right in the middle, pulling together Europe and pulling together China all through this, all right? So now, China's Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative meshes perfectly with the goals of the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Economy, and this is part of what I read a second ago. The Russian President Vladimir said on Friday his comments to the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing may help alleviate the concerns over the potential tensions between China and Russia, giving Beijing's rapidly expanding economic footprint in Asia, Moscow's traditional sphere of influence. What they're saying is that what China's doing isn't going to hurt us, it's only going to help us. It's basically going to be going through Russia. And all of them working together. Russia's going to be one of the main players in this. This is building up a scenario for later down the road of Gog and Magog. It's going to be coming into the picture. How does all that begin to play out? Let's take a look again. Putin told some 36 leaders attending the conference that China's move fits perfectly into our plans. The 5 member states unanimously supported the idea of linking the construction of the Eurasian Economic Community and the Belt and Road, Putin said. So while we're sitting over here and we're trying to get the balance of trade back in order, and I agree it should be back in order. The trouble is now, this is going on for so long, and China's president now has got to save face. They can't let it go down. Well, we have a president that's in for 4 years or 8 years. Their president is in for life now, and he's not going to let this go. He's not going to take whatever abuse he is. He's going to save face. And this is something we need to understand about the people over there. When you live in disgrace, you are dishonored, you have no future. So he's not going down in disgrace. So this is going to be a battle. It's going to be long term, and I'm going to show you that in just a second, what's going on here. China expanding their footprint. This is what we just read in one of the little pieces just a few moments ago. China with their footprint in the alignment to the biblical times. This is part of the time of the Gentiles. Look at Daniel 11, 40 and 45 through 45. During the time of the battles of the king of the north and the pushing against the king of the south, trouble arises out of the east. Where is China through all of this? They're out of the east, all right? They're out of the east, all right? But news of the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go with great fury to destroy and annihilate many, all right? This is, we're talking about the time of the Gentiles. For the time of the Gentiles to exist, the Gentiles will need to cooperate together against the United States and its allies. So what we're seeing now is this president puts his pressure on the rest of the world to bring back trade to where he feels like it ought to be, and honest, I'll say it again, it ought to be that way. They're not going to give up, and they're not going to give up easy. What they're doing is that while we increase the pressure on the rest of the world, and the United States looks like they're doing really well, the rest of the world is hurting. While they're hurting, they're forming alliances, and they're forming agreements with one another, part of which is oil, part of which is agriculture, part of which is how do we move our agriculture from country to country? And that's where you see the belts and the roads and all the trade. And so all of these things are lining up while our news is telling us how great we're doing in our economy. It's going to be a short while, and when that fall comes, it's going to be horrible when it comes, according to Scripture. These Gentile alignments will in all likelihood include the BRICS, the EAEU, the SCO, and the Silk Road. All of these arrangements are intended to do that, to bring down the United States when God says it's time. The European Union and the nations involved in them are all taking steps to align with the biblical prophecies. They probably have no idea that's even taking place, but you need to remember this. Don't ever forget this. God uses these other nations to bring down his nations, right? He uses let me repeat it again. He uses the other nations to bring down his nations when they are disobedient to him, just like we are right now. When you think about the disobedience of this nation to removing God, we're looking at a time that God now is building up the rest of this world so that when he decides it's time, he's going to pull down the gates of our nation itself. We're going to come tumbling and tumbling very quick. Think about it. You had Babylon. How we destroyed with Babylon. You had the Assyrians. Remember the Assyrians with the Israel and Babylon with Judah. How about the Romans? Think about the Romans, remember? Even during the time of Christ, how the Romans. And they're going to rise up, and Rome's going to rise up again, that holy Roman beast. And you're going to be pushing against the king of the north and king of the south. And in the middle of it all, what does God say? There's trouble coming out of the east. Can you see how this is lining up? This is important to understand, that what you're looking at, you can't get engrossed in your pocketbooks and thinking the economy is going to be here forever, because it's not. We're being built on quicksand. And when God decides to pull his plug with the debt and the problems that we have in America, and when the dollar is no longer the structure for which oil is traded upon, you're going to see this nation fall, and fall quickly, very quickly. So let's go on and tell a little bit more about what China's doing right now. It's tariffs and trade wars. China calls, this is incredible, China calls for a people's war against the U.S. and vows to fight for a new world. Now, I brought this out in the latest sermon I just did about rough seas, or the rough seas, and we're talking about, I'm going to do a part 2 in 2 weeks. In 2 Sabbaths, I'm going to be doing part 2. And so this is a slide that I used in that sermon. In a new series of op-ed articles, the Chinese state media slammed what it labeled the Trump administration's greed and arrogance. This is what they're telling their people. And he called for a people's war, targeting the U.S. with precision as China begins to fight for a new world. Sounds biblical, doesn't it? Fighting for a new world, all right? He went on. President Xi Jinping pointed out that the Chinese economy is a sea. What does the Holy Roman Empire talk about? Coming out of the sea. What does Luke 21, verse 25 talked about? The rough seas. And here we're using, again, biblical terms here. He says that is that we're a sea, we're not a small pond. He continued and said, a rainstorm can destroy a pond, but it cannot harm the sea. After numerous storms, the sea will still be here. And his reference point is that you can keep throwing all these tariffs at us, but when it's all over with, we're still going to be here, is what he's saying. All right. Now, how did he do this? Again, another amazing story about propaganda. Chinese television suddenly switches scheduling to anti-American films amid U.S.-China trade war. So their television is controlled by the government. I mean, you only get over there what they want you to have. So in the middle of all of this, they take their TV schedule and they start playing older movies and older news from the Korean War. Take a look at this. In recent days, China, the CCTV-6, the film channel of state broadcast of China's Central Television, has unexpectedly switched scheduling and plans to treat viewers to a number of post-war classics in prime time. Films all set during the Korean War, otherwise known as in China as the war to resist American aggression and to give aid to Korea. So here we are again. So what they're doing is they're taking in the propaganda in the mind of the people. He's telling them all of this that's going to hurt our country is just the greed of these Americans. They're out there just like they did during the Korean War. Their aggression is hurting our nation in this hemisphere again as he rounds everybody back up again. Yeah, so we're over here fighting for what? And they're over there now fighting for their nation, is basically what they're trying to do here. Now, look what else he does. This is phenomenal, the propaganda that they're doing that's building all this that you're not getting in the news. Xi Jinping called the new Long March a dramatic sign that China is preparing for a protracted war. What is that march? Let me tell you about that march, all right? China digging in. All right, he told the cheering crowds in Jiangxi, I believe it's pronounced, that we are now embarking on a new long march and we must start all over again. He's referring to the place where he places the reef that was following the Civil War of a retreat, a long, long march that actually gave them the victory in their own Civil War, that they're starting the war all over again. And they're in it for the long haul. So he's telling the people, get ready, we're not giving in to the imperialism of the United States. In his comments came with an increasingly sour mood in official Chinese media, which has become more forceful in its anti-U.S. rhetoric since the trade wars talks of the collapse. President Xi made the comments as he laid the wreath at a monument of the Long March following the Civil War. Now, if that's not bad enough, let me bring you one more piece of this story, all right? One more piece of the story. Following the visit to the monument, this is from CNN on 5/21. Xi visited the company in southeastern China which specializes in rare earth minerals such as that are vital to the production of high-tech devices, including smartphones, lasers, missile systems, superconductors, and a whole host of others. Now, why would he do that? So he leaves the reef and he goes over to the city where these businesses are, and he goes and he visits these people, and this is why. Because China accounted for 80% of all the rare earth minerals that are imported by the United States between 2014 and 2017. Nearly 80% of all our technology that it needs to operate comes out of China. I don't know if this administration took that into account. They did a little bit because they didn't put tariffs on those areas. They are among a few items not hit by the tariffs in Washington's most recent trade war escalations. Now, one more piece. Xi was accompanied to his visit to this Jiangxi by Liu He, the vice premier who has led the trade negotiations. Now, let's stop for a second. Let's get this picture now. They spend 3 days changing the TV and in the minds of everybody, talking about how rotten the country is that we live in. Then they go over and they honor those who died for their independence in their Civil War. Then they go over to the city and to these businesses where you have all these minerals being sold to the United States. And who accompanies him? The very guy who walked away from the trade table with the president's negotiators. They didn't say a word. They simply showed up. The news media comforted. But the symbol is obvious what's going on. Is that you want to play ball? We control where you go with your technology. That's the message. This morning, right after that, the United States backed off of Huawei. I don't know if you know who Huawei is. It's a huge company from China who's been trading around the world that the United States has been trying to put some of their executives in jail for some dishonest trade practices. The United States immediately backed away and took off the tariffs and said they could start trading again. Immediately, the stock market rose 200 points. These are the wars that the news are not telling you, and this is why. I couldn't understand in the last couple of days why the technologies have been falling. I mean, they've been taking a huge hit. Today, following the announcement of the president, following that visit, they're up. They're up. So there's battles that are going on, people, that we're not being told about. And while China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has tried to downplay the symbolism of the pair's visit, and analyst state media are in a little doubt that the message was being conveyed. Well, anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I think that's very, very important. All right, we're going to come back to our Nuggets portion of our program in just a few minutes, but I have a memorial tribute that's actually in two parts. And this will be the memorial tribute, and then there's going to be a piece by Ronald Reagan talking about Memorial Day, and I'll see you in about 5 minutes.
if we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David, they add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Quite touching when you think about all of the sacrifices people have made. We play this one with Ronald Reagan. News Nuggets and Insights has been around. This is our third year, and we've been blessed to be able to play that every single year. Become a tradition on our program today. We hope you enjoy it. We, God willing, and until Jesus Christ return, we'll continue to do that. Well, welcome back to our program, everyone. All right, so now let's begin our Nuggets portion with the Feast of Weeks. We're going to talk about the 50th, working to the Jubilee. All right, we've been talking about how you count and how you get there. So now we're going to talk about a little bit further of the counting and what God's talking about and something we didn't touch yet. All right, this is Leviticus 23:15-16. We talked about from the counting from the morrow after the Sabbath. We've covered that now for a couple weeks, but let me, in case you didn't see it, let me just bring us up to date. From the day that you brought the wave sheath offering, you shall, seventh Sabbath shall be complete, all right? Even unto the morrow after the seventh Sabbath, you shall number 50 days, all right? So that's the counting in Pentecost. Pentecost, actually people understand Pentecost and the Pentecostal church, the birth of the church as people understand in the New Testament. The word Pentecost literally means 50th. That's just a Greek word that means 50th, all right? Properly translated means 50th. But it's referring to the festival of Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks. It's looking at the one-day festival celebrated at the end of the barley harvest. but it's the events that leads up to that event what takes place, all right? So that's what we've been covering. So what does the 50th represent? Now, we have covered in the Old Testament, it represents the birth of the church in the wilderness, all right, when they received the law. In the New Testament, it's the birth of the church where they received the Holy Spirit, right? But it means more than that, all right? It means so much more than that. Let's talk about that for just a minute here in Leviticus 25, right? So now we're going two verses earlier, two chapters later in Leviticus 25. The chapter of the sevens, I call it, right? The land Sabbath and the Jubilee, to explain what the 50th is. And the meaning of the Jubilee, we actually need to read the chapter as God put it out there, beginning with the land Sabbath. Now, how many people ever heard of a land Sabbath? Well, Israel was cursed because they didn't keep a land Sabbath, right? Jonathan Cahn has kind of made the land Sabbath kind of famous these days, but he calls it a Shemitah, all right? The Shemitah, which is the land Sabbath or the seventh year. So let's read that now, see what we're talking about here. And the Lord spoke to Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them that when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. How about that? The land itself is going to keep a Sabbath day. You think the land's going to change the day from Saturday to Sunday? No. The land's going to keep the day that God gave it to keep. All right? What are we talking about here? Let's go a little further. 6 years you shall sow the field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But the seventh year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow or prune your vineyard. So in other words, you were allowed to eat your food on the seventh year that grew, but you couldn't go plant it, you couldn't harvest, you couldn't sell it. But if it just came out on its own, you were allowed to partake of what was there. All right, going on, verse 5. What grows of it of its own accord, a harvest, you shall not reap, nor gather of grapes that you had unintended for the vine, for it is the year of rest of the land. And the Sabbath shall bruise the land, shall be food for you, for your male, your female servants, and hired male, and the stranger who dwells with you, and for your livestock, and for the beasts that are in the land, and all that it produces shall be for food. That only. All right, that's all they were allowed to have in the seventh year. And the land had to rest. Try to imagine America today if they actually participated in land rest. First of all, you'd have panic across the nation, like how are we going to live during that seventh year? But God shows, and I don't have it all here, but God shows you that he says he will double the abundance on the 6th year, and it would carry them for 3 years. So now let's take a look at what God's building here to work into a millennial reign and a jubilee. All right, Leviticus 25, verse 4. But in the 7th year there should be a solemn rest of the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field or prune your vineyard, right? So that's the command. We let the land rest on the 7th year. People in the church, if they grow gardens, they let their land rest when the 7th year. So whenever you start growing your garden, just go back to figure out when you started. On the 7th year, don't plant it. Just let it rest. And during that time, it rejuvenates itself. You might want to put some fertilizer, compost, whatever you want to build your soil back so that you can get ready to start growing the following year. So now the 7th year is the land rest. So yeah, I'm pulling up our chart. So now let's take a look at this and show how God uses sevens, all right? So here we have the week. We all understand the 7. All right, so Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The Sabbath day is always the 7th day of the week. Now, when you realize how God's plan is, you realize it's impossible to change this to Sunday because then none of the rest of the plan fits, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So you have year 1, year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and year 7, which is the land rest, all right? So what God's telling us is that there's going to be, what we saw, the 7 weeks, that you begin counting your 7 weeks. It's also going to show us now that as you count the 7 weeks, or 7 years will begin counting toward the Jubilee. Follows the exact same typology. 7 days for Sabbath, 7 weeks to the 50th, which is the Pentecost, 7 weeks of years to a jubilee. All right, same thing. I'm gonna work on that now. Let me show you. Let's go through with that. The year of jubilee. And you shall count unto you 7 Sabbaths of years. See, that's the chart I just had up there. You had year 1, 2, 3, all the way through 7, right? All right, that brings us to a land rest. But now God's saying, we take this year, 7 years, and now we're going to have 7 years of 7 years. 7 times 7, bringing you into 49 years, and that's what this verse is telling you. You shall count 7 Sabbaths of years. All right, here's a Sabbath of years. I got to count 7 of them, is what God's saying. I got 7 years. I count 7 of those, just like 7 days. I get 7 years, and now we're going to take the 7 years times 7. All right, verse 8. You shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. The time of 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement, and you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year to proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. And it shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. Every 50th year, everything went back to its rightful owner on the Jubilee. And it was all done on the Day of Atonement at the 49th year. It was all returned. So let me ask you a question. When is Satan put away? What day is he put away? The Day of Atonement. So now you begin to see that as we move to this 50th day, it's more than just the birth of a church, because see, this is a foundation, remember? This is the beginning. This is the birth of the church. So when we think of Pentecost, that's 7 weeks. But now we're looking at 7 years. So we look at this time of 7 weeks times 7 years, all right? So now let's go on. All right, verse 8 through 12. All right, so now verse 11. And that the 50th year shall be a jubilee to you, and you shall neither sow nor reap what it grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes unintended, right? So this is the same instruction for the 7th year, all right? The land rest. Well, now everything's resting on the 50th year. Nothing's to be grown and harvested, only that which comes up on its own, all right? For it is the jubilee, it shall be holy to you. Let me ask another question, because this is so rich in everything that we're talking about now. I'll be talking about this in Pentecost, but I'll also will be talking about it over the next couple of weeks. How can you make anything holy? You can't. Of yourself, there's not a thing we can do to make things holy. So that's telling us something else. Not only is Satan put away on the atonement, leaving to the 50th year, something else is taking place and coming back into that 50th year to make it holy. It can only be holy when the presence of either Jesus Christ or the Father is there. So the Jubilee now is looking at something that began back with the church, working all its way to a future event that's not yet fulfilled. Counting the 50th. So now, let's do that. Let's do the 7 times 7 years. All right, so here comes our chart again. All right, so now we're putting up, now we repeat week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now what we have is 7 weeks or 7 years times 7 years. You see what I've got here? 7 Sabbaths of 7 years come together. Bring us to the 49 years, and what we just read, on that 49th year, at the end of the 49th year, on the Day of Atonement, Satan's put away. And what is ushered in? The millennial reign. Picturing the time of the return of Jesus Christ. And that's that reign. But then something comes afterwards. This takes place after the millennial reign. That's the 50th. What did we just read a little while ago? Everything's got to go back to its rightful owner. And part of what that mystery is found in chapter 25 in Leviticus, which I'll talk about beginning next week. All right, so next week we're going to talk about Hebrews 4, verse 8. We're going to tie that into the Jubilee. Look what God says here in verse 8. For if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not have afterwards spoken of another day. There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. That's duality. That means the Sabbath rest that we take every single week and a future rest of a Jubilee that we haven't got to yet. For he who has entered into his rest, he himself has also ceased from his works, as God did from his. Let us therefore be diligent to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall according to the same example of disobedience. So what God's telling us in Hebrews, there still remains a rest, you all, and you got to work at being there. We're going to take these scriptures and tie that into the Jubilee in the 50th day, beginning next week. Well, that's it for our program today. All right, so now, IR 19 or May 24th, whichever you prefer, we're talking about. We don't have too much from the home office this week, but we're sending out 2 DVDs. All We Want to Be by Chuck Hunt Jr., and then part 2 of Integrity in a Post-Christian Nation Like a Beacon to a Dying World, part 2. That's a sermon that I did about a couple months ago. So that part 2 will be going out. Well, that's it for our program this week. And as always, we want to play a very uplifting video. And today we're going to play Angel Flight. This is a very emotional video. You might want to get your napkins ready. We're going to play that video, Angel Flight, and I'll be right back to say goodbye till next week.
Andrews Tower, good morning. Angel Flight Bravo 02 ready for takeoff. Angel Flight Bravo 02, you're number 1 for takeoff. Runway 25, get them home, boys.
All I ever wanted to do was fly, leave this world and live in the sky. I let the C-130 out of Fort Worth town. I go up some days I don't wanna come down. Well, I fly that plane, call the Angel Flight. Come on, brother, you're with me tonight. Between heaven and earth, you're never alone. On the Angel Flight, come on, brother, I'm taking you home. I love my family and I love this land, but tonight this flight's for another man. We do what we do 'cause we heard the call. Some gave a little, but he gave it all. I fly that plane, call the Angel Flight. Come on, brother, you're with me tonight. Brother, you're with me tonight. Between heaven and earth, you're never alone. On the Angel Flight, come on, brother, I'm taking you home. Come on, brother, I'm taking you home.
Good afternoon, Angel Flight Bravo 02, checking in level 290. We got a hero on board tonight. Roger, radar contact, Godspeed.
Well, the carpet's quiet and the stars are bright. Feels kinda like church in here tonight. It don't matter where we touch down. On the Angel Flight, it's sacred ground. When I fly that plane, call the Angel Flight. Got a hero riding with us tonight. Riding with taking you home. Come on, brother, I'm taking you home.
Carswell Tower, good afternoon. Angel Flight Bravo 02, security out 5 Angel Flight Bravo 02, you're number 1 for landing. Welcome home.
You're never alone on the angel flight. Come on, brother, I'm taking you home.
Well, that's it for our program today. We hope you enjoyed the program and our tribute for Memorial Day to the fallen soldiers of this great nation. This weekend, when you spend time with your family and your loved ones, don't forget about all the families of those who have lost loved ones, who will be thinking about their loss and the loneliness that they have this week. And take some time and put a prayer out there that God will give them peace and comfort as we look for the return of Jesus Christ. And don't forget, take this program and share it with everybody you know. They're going to love you for it, or not. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. We'll see you next week.